First of all, we have started with an interactive session. Then we will provide a brief overview of field on climate finance. After this session, we'll cover the following topics: existing operational definition of climate finance, key mandate of reference on climate finance, developed versus developing country perspective on climate finance, key milestone from climate finance negotiation, climate finance workstream supported by the UNFCCC Secretariat in preparation for COP27. Finally, after Q&A and a short break, we will discuss about key estimate of climate finance need, first need determination report, the mechanism of tracking of climate finance on challenges, key channel and instrument used to deliver climate finance, and emerging issues on climate finance within and outside the UNFCCC process. So it's a big program, but I hope you enjoy it. Have you any question before I take the floor to Nathalie? No? So we are pleased to have among us today Nathalie Magondo, who is a youth fellow in finance with the UNFCCC high-level champions. She is an economist who brings more than 6 years of experience in climate change and sustainability in Southern Africa and across various sectors to the world. Nathalie holds a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Cape Town and is pursuing a Master of Science in Economics from the University of Zimbabwe as a Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership Master Scholar. So, welcome Nathalie, and I take the floor.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that introduction. So I'm really honored to deliver these opening remarks by this really important initiative catalyzed by Youngo in collaboration with RCC Kampala, the Eastern African Alliance of Carbon Markets and Climate Finance, the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, European Investment Hub, and Climate Investment Funds to bring forward the first ever Climate Finance Academy for youth. Now, why are we here today? First of all, we know that young people will bear the brunt of climate change, and yet we struggle to access the appropriate financing mechanisms for climate action. We also know that the investment and financing commitments that are made today will impact us in the future. Now, why do I say that? It's because the concessional loans that are being extended on terms substantially more generous than market loans today will impact our futures. And yet oftentimes we're left out of this decision-making. And as young people, we need to remind ourselves that we won't always be young. And just as we are standing on the shoulders of giants who have worked so hard to get us here today, one day other young people will hold us to account. And so we need to ensure that we're able to answer and be held accountable to future generations on the actions that we've taken here today to not only secure our futures, but theirs as well. And this Climate Finance Academy is a first and bold step in doing that. So I really do commend Youngo for catalyzing this intergenerational dialogue of a wide group of stakeholders. So I know we have many experts and specialists here today, but perhaps I can talk about the 3 ways I see us as youth taking up space in this discussion surrounding climate finance. First is, of course, capacity building, and this Climate Finance Youth Academy will go a long way in doing that to ensure that we're able to operate on the same level as those in power and develop the necessary technical and specialist expertise. Second, we need to ensure that we increase the credible supply of climate finance and the development of carbon markets, particularly for vulnerable regions and specifically for youth and other marginalized groups. Then third, we need to ensure that we do not make the same mistakes again. At the same time as we build our technical expertise and improve the supply of youth-responsive climate finance, we need to ensure that we are developing a comprehensive pipeline of viable, replicable, and scalable projects. So that's the framing I hope this discussion will take on building and retaining capacity, increasing climate finance supplies, development of carbon markets, and ensuring that the finance has somewhere attractive and viable to go in the form of projects. Thus, without further ado, I hand back over to the Younger Finance and Markets Working Group to talk about the incredible work that Younger is doing on all these fronts to ensure that we move from rhetoric to action and have answers for future young people and generations on what we have done today to secure their futures and transform our economies and societies. Because the time to act with urgency and scale is now. Thank you. Back over to you, Julie.
Thanks for sharing the remarks and for motivating our youth to participate and share interest on climate finance. So we can start the interactive session. It's a session who is perfect to speak with us we will go to start with a little quiz on climate finance. Don't forget to write the question, the answer of the question in the chat, please. So, developed countries should be joined to mobilizing 100 billion a year to help developing countries tackle climate change. In what years this promise will be reached? So in the chat, we have different answers, but the majority said 2050. It's correct. So we can pass at the two questions. How much, according to the IPCC, is required to transform the energy system alone until 2055 to limit temperature rise to below 1/2 from pre-industrial levels? So I see that the answers are very different, but the right one is 2.5 for the world economy. Question 3. What is the proportion of climate finance currently spent on mitigation vs adaptation? So I still see that the answers are very different, but the same one is regularly returned. So the correct answer is according to CPI report on global landscape of climate finance mitigation finance conducted to dominate at over 19 of total climate finance. So this interactive session is finished. I think you're good, but we can pass on another part, the part 2. So I take the floor to Karishma.
Hi everyone. I'm Karishma Ansam, the contact point of the Finance and Market Working Group at Yongo, and I wish to welcome you all to the very first Climate Finance Academy that we have launched today. So as you know, this is the very first one being organized by the youth and for the youth. And you are one of the 100 participants selected out of around more than 1,000 applicants. And we would like to congratulate you all here for being present and also for being so excited for this Climate Finance Academy. We look forward to having you over 4 sessions. It's well packed. You have seen the collaborators that we have in terms of diversity, being like collaborators and organizations being from both public sectors and private sectors, namely RCC Kampala, which would be delivering the first session today. And we also have Climate Investment Funds, European Investment Bank, the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, and also and also the East African Alliance for Carbon Markets. So you would get a snapshot and the basics of climate finance during this academy. You all have been selected from different backgrounds as well. As you may know, we do not expect, and this is not an expertise climate finance academy. We wish to empower youth from different thematic areas working on different levels related to climate finance, and that's why you're here. Such diversity and also from different regions coming here together to learn more about climate finance and how it can be applied to what you're already doing in your climate actions. So just giving a bit of background how we came up for this academy. You might be wondering why this academy came now, or how did it get founded? So we have been talking a lot about empowering youth on climate finance or scaling climate finance for youth. So at Yongo working group, we have been doing a needs analysis where we've seen that people, and especially youth, cannot access climate finance because they are not aware of what it is. So when you're not aware, you can also not explore the opportunities that is out there to finance your own climate actions. So we wanted to give you a very first introduction to climate finance so that you can get a starting point on the different avenues that climate finance can have into your own engagement related to climate change. So this is a bit of a background where we came from, and also what is the objective behind the academy. As I mentioned very well, that we intend to empower youth that is not only focusing on climate finance, but you come from agricultural background, marine and biology, tech, ocean, and also renewable energy. So all that needs to be financed, and you need to know your way out, and you need to know what needs to be known. So I would like to share with you very quickly about what we've been talking and where this needs analysis was created. So this is the report that we did since last year, and it was launched May this year. So we assessed the youth needs for climate finance. And we worked this report with the youth. So we surveyed the youth, and we wanted to represent the youth voice on these topics and advocate for increased climate finance for the youth. So thereon, this is one of the very first study that is mapping what is available as climate finance for youth. And this project started from a very simple observation on the attention that climate finance has been received in previous years on global level, on ongoing conferences, especially related to youth. I'm still in Gabon for Africa Climate Week, and I was joined by Natalie this week, and we spent a lot of time advocating for climate finance. And I'm sure that Natalie and I are equally surprised by how many events were focused on young climate finance and the importance that climate finance is being given in this space now. So clearly there is a momentum being built, and we youth are not going to lag behind into joining this wagon on climate finance. So the methodology is that we surveyed more than 100 youth across different regions, and we also did interviews with organization leaders. So these youth were specific. They had to be board members, leaders of organizations, so they had to know the finance of the organization so that they could talk to us, explain to us what is being done in terms of climate finance and accessibility of climate finance for them. So this is where this whole concept of a Climate Finance Academy has been generated. As you can see, we spoke to you to know about how you define climate finance, and most of you would say that it's a public and it's mostly a public climate finance access. So you would relate it to UN-based organization giving the money. And also we know that so far there is no agreed definition for climate finance being worked on by the Standing Committee of Finance of the UNFCCC. But as youth, when we surveyed the youth, we could see that they did not have a good notion about what climate finance was and what are the different types of climate finance as well. So if you do not know, you're not going to explore the opportunities and all the different mechanisms in place, as I mentioned. And when we talk about awareness about the type of climate finance, you could see that most of them were familiar with grants, but when we see loans, equity, and bonds, these are the instruments that they say that they are not familiar at all. So we youth, we are called to be, we are asked to be innovators. We are the one who are asked to come up with new business ideas and set up and climate related businesses, but yet we do not know how to unlock those instruments. So this is a bit what we found. We will be sharing the report with you by email and also in the chat so that you can have access to it. Especially information about where to get the funding. This is also a key barrier that we noticed, because most of you replied that you would be using a WhatsApp group to share information about this. And we all know we are in this space, and we all know how busy we can get into WhatsApp messages to keep track of applications being rolled out. And there are some dedicated platforms like African Youth. They mostly tend to use Opportunity Desk or Fund for NGOs or newsletter or specific organization to access climate finance. So information sources is one of the gaps that we found. It's not like a dedicated platform to this. Then we also surveyed how the participation in climate finance is being done in terms of decision making and initiatives. You could see that most of you could get education and empowerment, but very less could get really financial support from different organizations. Civil societies are very much active, as you can see, into supporting youth and climate-led, finance-led actions, but yet the private sector are lagging behind, or it's that youth do not know how to approach this private sector as well to unlock this barrier to access climate finance. And we could see, as you can see, this diagram is very well what we expected so far. So youth has mostly accessed grants, to climate grants to fund their actions, and they also finance for membership subscriptions or savings and community support, but less of them would really use other type of financial instruments to finance climate actions. Some barriers, bureaucratic process, we all know that. And then this big one is capacity building, where we are trying to help you to understand what is climate finance, how is it done, and how you can access climate finance. Lack of diversity in funding, and this is something that we would continue to advocate for with the private sector, one step at a time. Information and miscommunication as well. So we have some recommendations that I will let you read without taking much time, and because this report will be shared with you. And I'm very happy to announce that RCC Kampala, and with the help of Julius, who is also our first speaker for today, we would be hiring a research intern to work on a third research project, because this is the first one. We have a second report coming on the road to COP27, but we would also be working on a third project with the help of RCC Kampala and East African Development Bank, as well as Commonwealth Climate Finance, to look at clearly accessibility of climate finance for youth. So through reactions, please clap. Please give a clap for RCC Kampala for supporting the youth in this initiative. And without further ado, I'll let you take most out of this academy and to have a very good session throughout the 4 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Karishma, for introducing this academy and for supporting this initiative. I just want to take 1 minute to present Karishma, because this academy would not have been possible without the support of our contact point, Karishma and Saram. Youngo Finance and Market Working Group has been advocating for scaling access to climate finance for youth. This academy has been divided from a needs assessment carried out, and the finding can be derived from our report on youth needs for climate finance. I Now we can pass to the part 3, whose name Overview of Climate Finance under the UNFCCC. Without further ado, the moment that you all have been waiting for has arrived. We are here to start the very first week of the academy. We are glad to have UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center, SCC Kampala, as the main partner for the session. I would like to invite Julius Atulind and Leonard Schmidt to take the floor and provide an overview of climate finance under the UNFCCC. Leonard Schmidt is a research consultant within the climate finance policy and analysis unit of the UNFCCC. His main focus of work is in the thematic of geographical assessment of climate finance flows and access issues for developing countries, as well as on methodologies in use to operationalize and track climate relevant finance. For example, through taxonomies or domestic green budgeting. Previously, he was a trainee in the Climate Policy Unit of the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg, where he worked among others as a chaper to the Union platform on sustainable finance. Leonard holds an MPhil in international relations from the University of Oxford and a BA in political science from the University of Maine. Julius Atulind is a climate finance expert at ERCC Kampala with several international climate finance certification. Main area of work includes supporting the implementation of the needs-based finance project, which assists countries to access the climate finance gap, barrier to access and mobilization, and develop climate finance strategy and pipeline of projects to meet their commitments under the Paris Agreement. Passionate about project economic and financial viability assessment, project document writing, due diligence, project management, and implementation support with over 5 years proficiency prior to RCC Kampala. So thank you, Julius and Leonard, for taking your time to prepare and deliver this insightful session. We now open the floor for, we have now to take time to listen you.
Thank you, Jody, for the introduction. And it is a very true honor and pleasure to be sharing part of my Saturday with youth who we share the same interest with in supporting the joining hands with the international community to address challenges that affect our communities. So I'm Julius Atulind. I'm from RCC Kampala, and so for those who haven't heard about the regional collaboration centers of the UNFCCC Secretariat, I'll do a quick introduction just about what RCCs do and who they are. Just confirm that you are seeing my presentation. Julie, it's my presentation showing.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. So the UNFCCC has 6 regional collaboration centers, and why we call them collaboration centers is because they are hosted with regional institutions. And in the case of RCC Kampala, we are hosted by the East African Development Bank, and we support the Eastern and Southern Africa, covering 19 countries in the region. And we also have in Africa the other RCC Lome for West Africa. We have the other RCC for MENA, which is based taking North Africa, which is based in Dubai. And as you can see just on the slide overview, the other areas of the world. And the purpose, the main objective, these RCCs were established under the mitigation division of the Secretariat back in 2013. And the purpose then was to support the regional distribution of CDM project, because not many countries had benefited from those. But with the coming of the Paris Agreement and the agenda or the mandate of the RCCs have evolved to support all the work streams of the Paris Agreement. And one of the things we do is supporting, working as a catalyst of climate action in the region, and through facilitating cooperations among the various stakeholders, and also gathering intelligence from various sources and putting it to use to enhance the implementation of climate action in the region. So that is it about the RCCs. So I'm sure most of you in the areas you're located, there are still other regional collaboration centers, which gives the RCCs and the Secretariat an understanding of what is on the ground.
Hi, Julius, are you with us? I guess you're muted.
Sorry, my slide was a bit faint. Now, so we want to thank Yango for this collaboration on capacitating youth, and I would emphasize that the Secretariat in general and the global community, that there is an increased appreciation of the capacity and the potential of youth to drive climate action, and also with an understanding that these are the people, these are the leaders of the coming generations, and who naturally are expected to live longer and see the challenges of climate change. So RCC Kampala and the other RCCs really support the aspect of youth capacity building, and that's why we highly welcome the collaboration with Yungo. So as Natalia and Karishma indicated, that this is an introductory session, so we'll start with the basics of climate finance, and with the understanding that part of the audience there are people who may not have knowledge at all, and there are those who have a bit of advanced knowledge on climate finance, but also on the UNFCCC process in general. So we hope that if you already have some advanced knowledge, and this session will serve as a refreshment of the key principles underlying the climate finance negotiations. So in this whole session one, I hope you'll be able to differentiate climate finance flows and existing definitions, then also develop your own view of what climate finance should be, and as it relates to the other perspectives in climate finance, but also be able to use the current data on climate finance flows and challenges to use those as a basis for your advocacy and intervention work. And also we hope that you become aware of the emerging issues on climate finance within and outside the process. So this session today has two presentations. The first presentation, which I'll be doing now, where I will focus on the existing operation definitions of climate finance, the key mandates and references on climate finance, where we look at where the climate finance comes from and the developments that we have seen. Then we see various perspectives on climate finance, and then what are the milestones or negotiations in regard to what key concrete decisions that the Conference of Parties has undertaken that have really resulted into action on the ground. And then the second part by my colleague, I will be focusing on the needs, climate finance needs, the flows, the barriers to access, and emerging issues. So to start with, on the first presentation, so as Karisma highlighted in their report, that there is no agreed definition of climate finance, but luckily coming from Glasgow, the COP requested COP requested the Standing Committee on Finance to start work on sensitizing existing definitions with an aim of developing an agreed definition of climate finance in the context of meaningful climate actions. And to that end, a call for submissions was issued by the Standing Committee on Finance, calling for various parties and non-parties to submit their views and opinions. And if you'd like to interest yourself in what some of the perspectives of countries on defining climate finance, this presentation will be shared with you, and here will be a hyperlink to some of the submissions. As of June, 7 submissions were received. That is from the Republic of Kenya and from the Africa Group of Negotiators, from USA, then from the LDC group and other think tanks. So in these definitions, we see some elements around which the definition is formed. For example, the objectives of finance, what is finance doing and why is it needed? And then we see also some definitions focusing on the sources, where is climate finance where is this flows, where should they come from, and then the other the other definitions, especially as recently being referred to in the IPCC reports, the definitions focusing on the recipients of finance, but also what should be the channels and the instruments for climate finance. So for the purpose of tracking climate finance or describing what climate finance is or is not, there are a few commonly used definitions, and which have been used by the UNFCCC Secretariat or UNFCCC bodies, but also by the IPCC in its fifth assessment report. One under the UNFCCC is that the climate finance basically refers to sources from local, national, transnational data drawn from the public, private, or alternative sources of funding that seeks to support adaptation and mitigation actions that will address climate change. So these definitions here clearly focuses on the sources of finance, but also the objective, which is to support mitigation and adaptation actions, and also the other definitions by the Standing Committee on Finance, as used in its first biannual assessment of 2014, is that climate finance should aim at reducing emissions, enhancing sinks of greenhouse gases, reducing vulnerability, and maintaining and increasing human and ecological systems to negative climate change impacts. And then the other description of climate finance also stated in the same year as the Standing Committee of Finance. This definitions was by the IPCC, that climate finance is applied to financial resources devoted to addressing climate change globally, and it flows to developing countries to assist in addressing climate change. As you can note, in the case of IPCC, this definition came from an analysis of other existing descriptions of climate finance, where they came to a conclusion that there was no agreed definition, but this was the general understanding or description of what climate finance was. So, much as there is no definition of climate finance yet, but the concept of climate finance was included in the convention from the outset. So as we can see, from the start back then in 1992, when the UNFCCC, the convention was established under Article 4, which are basically the commitments made by the parties then, and paragraph 3 indicated that developed countries committed, developed countries and that developing countries and other parties included in Annex 2 shall provide new and additional financial resources to meet the agreed full cost, to meet the agreed full cost incurred by developing countries. So here we see this is where the first this this article presents the very first reference mandates on climate finance, and these provisions here have informed the climate finance discussions. They have become the key principles of making any climate finance decisions. And if you just reread some of the climate finance decisions that have been reached over time, there is always first an acknowledgement and reaffirmation of these key principles that were stated back then in 1992, even if the actual description of climate finance was not defined, but the key elements were being clearly elaborated by the convention. And like paragraph 4 indicates that developing countries shall assist developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change in meeting the costs of adaptations to those adverse effects. Again, by this time in 1992 also, this mandate was emphasizing the importance of adaptation, was emphasizing the importance of equal provision of adaptation and mitigation cost. Also to date, unfortunately, that has not matched as the quiz, as you saw in the quiz. Then also at this time, the parties were emphasizing, particularly under paragraph 3, if you read it in its entirety, it also emphasized the predictability and continuity of climate finance, which has remained a key principle or demand in the climate finance discussions. So still to continue with this on the same, to continue on the same mandate, this further, sorry. Yeah, so Article 4 of the convention further states that the extent to which developing countries will effectively implement their commitments under the convention will depend on the effectiveness of implementation by the developed countries in their commitments, and commitments particularly referring to paragraph 3, where they're supposed to provide adaptation finance, they're supposed to provide financial resources and all that. And also it states that the economic and social development and poverty eradications are first and overriding priorities of a party, and particularly developing country parties. So this means that we know very well that a number of economies are still reliant on unclean energy, fossil fuel based energy. And some of you might be wondering why is it so hard for my government, or for a government, or for any government to come out and be heard on coal, for example, coal usage and other high emission activities. And so long as those activities are still critical to eradicate poverty, are still critical for the economic development of the country, basing on this principle, the country will clearly make its case to the negotiations, and therefore fail to make any hard commitment against fossil fuels, for example, in their negotiation position. And the other key principle is that the consideration of the situation of parties in regard to the adverse effects of implementation of measures to respond to climate change. So this ties to the earlier principle just mentioned on putting poverty and social development a priority. So this is the consideration of the situation basically is tried to bring out the concern of just transition. Is that in implementing, in addressing climate change, the countries, the parties will also recognize the implications of doing so. For example, the implications of setting up coal-fired plants. And so recently, that's why you see there will be increasing support, for example, to help countries to start assessing the social and economic impact of transition so as to ensure a just transition. So all these actions are, some of the actions we see today still go back to the very same principles that were agreed back in 1992. So that is all under paragraph 4 of the convention, which gives the very first mandates on climate finance or reference points on climate finance. So it's over time, the negotiations have used this mandate as a key reference point in building their own national position papers to the negotiations. And then also equally important, Article 11 of the Convention of the UNFCCC was about establishing the financial mechanisms. So the financial mechanism basically described how to manage the support under Article 4. How shall this support be? How shall it flow effectively, and how shall it be monitored as it addresses the objectives of the convention? So by then, the Global Environmental Facility also established around the same time, 1993, was became the first and interim at that time operating entity of the financial mechanisms. And here by the time of the Climate Change Convention was established, there are other two conventions that were established as well. That was on Convention for the Biological Diversity, as well as the one on combating the desertification. So the GEF served these three. The GEF served these three conventions. So then, over time, there were reviews. Over time, the COP reached a decision to review the financial mechanisms after four years. And at this COP27, it will be, the parties will be looking at the 7th review of the financial mechanisms. but over time, since the GEF was meant to serve the other two conventions, and its governance and control was not entirely under the Conference of Parties of the Climate Change Secretariat. Over time, parties agreed to establish other dedicated operating entities. So where we saw the Adaptation Fund being established in 2001, and also together with the Least Developed Country Fund and Special Climate Change Fund are being established in 2001. And then lately in 2010, the Green Climate Fund was established. So since the establishment of these funds, so there have been so much discussion on how they should operate, but one key thing to put in mind, especially when critiquing barriers to access, when critiquing how difficult it is to actually access these funds. It's also important to understand that the governance of these funds, especially the Green Climate Fund, is fully under the mandate, is fully under the powers of the Conference of Parties, and also in its institutional governance. All these funds have always had equal representations in terms of board members who are the decision makers of the funds. So clearly, it would not say that they are either influenced by developed countries or less developed countries. No, first of all, the guidelines are given by the COP, and the COP are the parties and the governments in charge. So the discussion on the financial mechanism is quite long, and each separate fund can be a topic of its own. So for now, I will stop that discussion here, but I just brought these two funds to underline the development of the financial mechanisms over time. So if you are starting to understand the concept of climate finance, if you want to be able to participate in the negotiations of climate finance and be able to critique or comment on other people's positions, so these two articles from the convention right back in 1992 are really critical for you to understand. And throughout the presentations, I put hyperlinks where you see the underline to refer you to more summarized information for your consumption. So quickly, I'd like to show you here some of the progression on climate finance since 2001. Since 2001. So for just in case you are not aware that there is a climate finance, there is a climate finance booklet. Sorry. There is a booklet for climate finance decisions that is compiled, and this contains all the key decisions of the COP every year in an easy way to follow. So in the next slide, I'll just share with you some of the outcomes, some of the highlights from all this road from 2001 until 2019, almost 20 years. So from now. So in 2001, sorry. So in 2001, the key decisions were the establishment of the Adaptation Fund, and which has to date mobilized over $1 billion US, including, of course, the new commitment from COP. And then there are also the establishment of the other two funds, which are managed by the GEF, the Least Development Country Fund, which focused on supporting countries in implementing their adaptation actions, preparing adaptation plans, and so on. And from 2001 to 2010, from 2001 to 2010, so the discussion was basically around how to make the adaptation fund work. So it's a bit of a disappointment, but also a lesson to learn for the next generation of the negotiators, and how such a decision to operationalize a fund can take up to 9 or 10 years to actually work. So from the time the adaptation fund was established as a mandate until the first disbursement or first project was made, it took 9 years, and all that other period of time was used to discuss just like to discuss how the fund should work, what should be the governance, and so on. But in 2010, at least there was some improvement on that when the Green Climate Fund was established. For it never took 9 years, but also about 5 years from the time of its establishment to when it was able to make a first approval in 2015. So again, from 2010 to 2015, emphasis there was basically discussing how the fund should work, and the related legalities. So in terms of process efficiency, there was an improvement, of course, but still, if you are talking about the urgency of climate action, 5 years would still be too much for countries to finally agree on how a fund should work. Also in 2010, which is the COP16, other key milestones there was the commitment by developed countries to provide 30 billion between 2010 and 2012 in additional resources, and also when the dear goal of 100 billion by 2020 was set. And importantly, also in 2010 was the establishment of the Standing Committee on Finance. So the Standing Committee has to date evolved to support a number of activities that we will look at, that we can look at the end. And so until 2015, the other key achievement, of course, that didn't result into actual structure or commitment was the finalization of the Paris Agreement, which had the Article 9 reaffirming that developed countries shall provide financial resources, and also emphasizing progression beyond the previous efforts, but also for the first time changed the narrative of the direction of climate finance and encouraged the other parties, not necessarily developed countries, to voluntarily provide support. And then embedded to the objectives of the Paris Agreement was Article 221C, which called for the alignment of global financial flows with a low carbon and climate resilient pathway. And again, this alignment or consistency doesn't necessarily mean first this other section of 221C is open to both developed and developing countries, and it has no specific at the moment has no specific target, and neither is it neither does it has a lawful character. So it's a bit voluntary to say, because it has no, it doesn't give any timelines or specific action plan for the parties, but also the consistency. It cuts across all flows, private, whether by parties or non-party stakeholders, but especially to parties, because because they signed the Paris Agreement, and these parties are also expected that to work within their countries to be able to influence the private sector and other stakeholders within their jurisdictions to ensure this alignment happens. And this then does not necessarily mean that all flows should be climate finance flows, or they should deliver climate change benefits, but rather they should reduce harm to climate change. So in other words, they should not be eroding the efforts of the core climate finance. And then also in 2015, and a key decision also as to about setting of a new collective quantified goal on finance, and this has formed part of the climate finance agenda since, basically looking at how to build a more comprehensive goal above the 100 billion goal. And then lately in Glasgow, and we saw so in Glasgow as well, and there are several mandates to the affecting the work of the Standing Committee on Finance, but also what is key to highlight here, although not necessarily embedded within the UNFCCC process, was the climate finance the delivery plan to help meet the 100 goal by 225. So this goal also currently within the UNFCCC process, there is no formal decision to help in following up the implementation of this delivery plan. But with the coordination of the COP presidencies, it's very likely that it's very likely that this plan will affect the engagement between parties in ensuring the 100 billion goal is met. And one key platform to affect this is a high level, is the ministerial dialogues on climate finance, which are held every 2 years. So these are some of the key. These are some of the key mandates from COP on finance. Just you see, I selected some years because the years I have missed here, it means that basically parties were we are still carrying on the mandates from the previous COPs. For example, from 2010, since the standing committee came into establishment, it has remained with its workload or terms of reference, it has remained on the COP agenda for matters relating to finance. The same thing for all the operating entities of the financial mechanisms. They have also remained part of the agenda, and discussions on every COP on how to improve their performance and so on always form part of the agenda. So in terms of COP27, how the key items are underlined on the agenda, these are of course, sorry. So these are the decision on long-term finance, which has been on the agenda, and basically this deals with the Secretariat helping to engage developing countries to be able to develop strategies on how to be able to deliver on their commitment, and also tracking that the support provided. Also, it's about one unique project that came out of it is the needs-based finance project that RCC Kampala is working on. So the needs-based project complements the other work on long-term finance, which is about assisting developed countries to design strategies to deliver on their commitments. So the needs-based finance, on the other hand, assists developing countries to assess their needs and develop strategies to be able to address their climate change priorities. So in a way, the long-term, the work stream on long-term finance looks to support both the supply side and the recipient side of climate finance. And then the other issues on the matters relating to the Standing Committee of Finance, and where most of these work streams have been there since the SCF. But two new things to highlight here to the discussion is the work on climate finance definitions that the SCF started working on from Glasgow, and then also the work relating to Article 21C, which is on alignment of the financial flows. So also the SCF started to look at how this 21C can be actually operationalized, and this is a very important step. Otherwise, this would have remained in Paris Agreement for a long time before it is actually realized on the ground. And then the other thing out of the SCF to highlight here is the matters relating to funding arrangements to address loss and damage issues. Also, this is a new item on the agenda for the finance, and also interesting to follow, especially for people from countries that are highly vulnerable. So that comes to the end of my presentation. Sorry, it took a bit long, but on this last slide, I've included several references which have very summarized information for you to read more, especially the detailed work of the SCF and the various documents that have been considered. And then also importantly, the climate finance delivery plan, which from Glasgow, which outlined 10 actions that developed countries need to undertake to be able to deliver the 100 billion goal. And this plan is important and also reflects the aspiration of both developed countries and developing countries, as it was developed in close consultation with both sides. So basically, these 10 actions in the delivery plan outlines the aspirations of the countries. So I'll end here, and sorry for taking too much time. I'll appreciate any questions. Please feel free to ask any questions, and also to write them in the chat now or even after. You can direct them to the focal points. We'll be pleased to answer them in the course of the academy. Thank you.
So thanks, Julius, for this presentation. It was very interesting. Now we go to. We have now reached the end of the first part of this session, but before we go to do a little Q&A session, Julius, you can find a lot of questions in the chat. I think you can just take your question. Julius, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So you can do the Q&A question, because they have a lot of questions in the chat. I think you can just take the answers of one or two.
Yes, maybe also in the interest of time, we could I'll look at the questions and respond as the other session. And if I cannot answer all questions by the end of the session, I will still do a Q&A, which we can send to the participants, all participants.
Okay, so we have now reached the end of the first part of the session and look forward to the second part. We would like to invite you for a 10 minutes health break.
Julie, actually, sorry to interrupt, it has to be reduced to 5 minutes because we are already running out of time. Sorry.
Okay, so you have 5 minutes break. Okay, so the break is over. And we can start the part 4, which name is Climate Finance Need versus Flows. Welcome back, fellow youths. We look forward to having more insight on the second part of this session, which is related to climate finance needs versus flows. I would like to invite Leonard Schmidt to take the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to this webinar. It's great to see that so many people are interested in climate finance and want to learn more about it. I'm currently still trying to share my screen, which is a bit of I currently have problems opening that. So please give me another second. But so apparently I quickly have to drop off to being able to share the screen. So sorry about that. I'll be with you in a second. So I'm very sorry. I hope I can now share my screen. So there we go. Thank you so much for making the time. I'll be very brief and try to be as efficient as possible to keep it to the 2 hours that we have for this meeting. Thank you to my colleague Julius, who has already explained the mandates and the references and has given you the whole overview of this ecosystem of climate finance in the UNFCCC context. I'm a researcher in the climate finance unit, and we are mainly focusing on looking at tracking global climate finance flows and looking at how much climate finance is dispersed and approved and going through the various sources and channels, which are mainly the multilateral climate funds, the bilateral, so government-led flows, as well as through the multilateral development banks. And I'll present on the needs today versus the flows. So I'll explain first on the ecosystem of tracking and reporting, and then go into the first needs determination report that was conducted in 2021, and then compare this with the actual climate finance flows to make a bit of a narrative for this session. What we are looking at in terms of what climate finance, there's some available sources of information and approaches to assess those finance flows, and a lot of it is captured under the Paris Agreement, what is called the means of implementation and mobilization of support, and we are looking at finance specific, which includes climate finance flows from developed to developing countries. And this is looked at from a thematic angle or from geographical distribution. So thematic is mainly adaptation and mitigation finance, but there are also countries who, for example, look into more detail on loss and damages or disaster risk management, for example. Yeah, we are looking at these climate finance flows also from the angle of the priorities and needs of the developing country parties, where that money is flowing towards, because that should be aligned finance and the needs and priorities. And available sources of information are also on the projected level of finance that developed countries have are reporting on in accordance with Article 9.5 of the Paris Agreement, something that Julius explained previously, but also assessing those flows in terms of challenges and barriers, what needs to happen that this finance actually reaches the local and national level. On the other side, there's also finance flows pursuant to Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, but given the time, that might be like the whole topic could cover more hours and maybe even an own webinar. So I'm not going into depth on this. In our unit, what we do is basically preparing objective reports on climate finance as it is committed and delivered, and we draw from a range of sources of information, but and a very important source is the national reports that countries communicate to the UNFCCC, to the convention and the Paris Agreement through their NDCs, NCs, but there's a range of others, as you will see further. And there's also different provisions. So developed country parties, Annex 2 parties, so to say, they report differently, sometimes in more granularity than developing countries are or have to report. But developing countries can also voluntarily report on how much finance and support they receive, for example. And then there's aggregates reports that are created from those. So the fourth biennial assessment of the SEF, that is the latest global overview and assessment and overview of climate finance flows. And that draws together all of these sources. But there's also been the first needs determination report that I will be talking about in more detail and depth. And the MDBs report on their climate finance, so the large multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, for example, which is the biggest, but also there's in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, Latin America, there's different banks that belong to this consortium of mainly 8. Recently, there's been a 9th integrated of large banks who report through a joint climate finance report, and the bilateral contributors, the governments, report through the OECD-DAC, the Development Assistance Committee, climate-related development statistics. And we also draw from global reports. So there's the CPI Global Landscape of Climate Finance series, that provides a large overview on all kinds of climate finance that are globally committed or is invested. And they not only count the public sources, but also what the private sector does, for example, and provide an overview by sectors, for example, so energy efficiency, renewable energy investments, all of that. And we try to kind of synthesize all of that and look into that to kind of get a sense of the figures. And particularly on Article 9, so on the provision of support on finance, you can see here an overview or a graphic that shows how complicated it actually is to aggregate and synthesize all this information. Because climate finance comes from a range of different sources that you can see on the left, the data providers, and then there are data aggregators, so to say. So each government provides information through reports to the UN, through their biennial reports for Annex 2 countries, so developed countries, and developing country parties through their BURs. But then, so this is directly, but then there's also kind of intermediate reporting where the OECD provides information, the development finance institutions aggregate their numbers, the MDBs have the Joint Climate Finance Report, and there are these global or commercial databases that I talked about. So basically the takeaway from this slide is that there's a diverse sources and different operationalizations and so understandings what climate finance is and what is eligible. And because of that, it's difficult to paint one or to provide one clear picture of how much finance, for example, there is, or how much finance flows, because there's also different definitions, and information from national reports are not always the same, which makes it then difficult to come to a clear-cut conclusion. But yeah, every year or every second year, the SCF, the Standing Committee on Finance, is trying their best to kind of present all the information that is out there in a way that you can at least see all the figures next to each other. Yeah, the Standing Committee on Finance has also adopted a kind of one operational definition of climate finance that Julius has presented previously. So now I'm talking about the data aggregation for the needs determination report, because in the end I wanted to tell you what the outcomes were on the needs for climate finance of countries versus kind of the current flows. And in the first needs determination report, basically what was done was aggregating from a bottom-up perspective, that's what we call it, all national communications from developing countries, looking at those. So this includes NDCs and NCs, but also BURs and adaptation and technology related communications. And we took each of those action points they mentioned, looked at whether there was some financial information attached to it. Yeah, from that aggregated per source of information, so per type of report, the climate finance needs that were reported and communicated to the UNFCCC. The time period was until 2021, but there was also global studies taken into account to kind of present some reference points. Okay, this is what the countries report, and this is what, for example, the IEA, Global Investment Reports, the IMF, or the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report, for example, had calculated in like modeling studies what was needed in terms of investment. The main finding was that there's a lot of capacity and methodological challenges for countries to actually come up with an estimate of what needs they have in terms of the sectors and the themes, so mitigation, adaptation, and especially how to estimate the costs of these actions, of these policies to implement. In particular, this was the case for adaptation, as I will go into more depth later. And here you see kind of, this is the key finding, the key overarching finding of the NDR report is in the larger bullets. So you have aggregated by each individual type of report. So NDCs, for example, are kind of the most important maybe source of or reference point of countries' climate action plans and what they are looking to do over the next years. And here, for example, 78 NDCs that were taken into account amounted to, actually 153 amounted to 400 or more than 4,000 needs that were identified, so action points. And of that, 1,782 were those needs where you had financial information. So for example, country X saying, we need X amount of money to implement our investment program on a given sector. This can be energy, or this can also be aggregate figures by country state. This is the amount of investments calculated to reach the mitigation targets stated in an NDC. For example, emission reduction targets against the baseline or against the business as usual scenario. And the financial information was ranging around, around about 5.8 billion. So that was the aggregate figure of 78 parties that had given any financial information. And so this breakdown of needs in terms of uncosted and costed needs is available for all types of reports. And you will have more detail in the NDR, where I can share the links when I send over the presentation later. And a key finding was that adaptation measures and needs were quite high.
Okay, so thanks, Leona, for this presentation. It was really clear and interesting. Yes, almost. Yes, you are right. We can wait for 2 minutes. It's probably the internet which have cut. So during this time, remember to complete the mandatory attendance form, which is in the chat. Oh, Leona is here. Okay.
So I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened. Suddenly I was going out of the meeting. Yeah, I'll be brief. I'll try to wrap up soon and present you also with the global climate finance figures to actually compare against the needs. But a key takeaway is that adaptation needs were always more numerous in the reports. But in the end, the financial information was often missing for them because it appears to be more difficult to actually quantify the needs in terms of what can be done for adapting to climate change and how much these project costs, for example, on physical infrastructure, but also on making populations more climate resilient and what it takes, for example, to make health and social sectors more climate resilient. This was a key takeaway of the report. In light of time, I'll not go into depth on the sectors. You can find that in the summaries of the needs determination report that gives you an overview of what is kind of the key areas where by the mitigation or adaptation countries seek support. So now comparing this to global climate finance figures, you see that we are going from trillions to billions. So global climate finance flows in 2017-18. So I'm using the fourth BA as the reference point, as the fifth BA with newer figures will only be published later this year. It will capture 2019 and 20 as well. That's important to take in mind. So global climate finance flows is all public concessional finance, but also what is happening in the private sector And the key takeaway here is that those were around 775 billion on average in those 2 years, but flows in high greenhouse gas emission activities were still higher by roughly 200 billion per year. A lot of growth also on Article 21C, so that's kind of greening finance or green finance as a whole. And going into the climate specific financial support that was reported was 37.8 billion per year. This is climate specific financial support, which does not always include what public concessional finance that is reported in a way of having co-benefits for climate. So there's, for example, for the Rio DAC markers, so the system how to mark climate finance for official development assistance. There's principal and significant projects that can be marked, and climate significant is kind of where climate is heavily included in those projects, but the project is not primarily focused on the climate aspect, so to say, and some of these flows are not integrated into that figure of climate specific financial support. On the sources, so we see an upward tendency, so multilateral climate funds increase their approvals, but the replenishment, so what went in the funds, was a bit reduced during that time, but it's increasing again, and MDBs increasingly or significantly increased their climate finance flows as well by 50% compared to the previous 2 years. So that was 2015-16. Still, there's a lack on estimates on climate finance received in developing countries, and that also always poses a bit of an issue or a perception gap, because they're, from the provider perspective, they report quite detailed on what is committed and approved, but information is often lacking of how much is received by countries in a given year, and that will be important in the future to kind of increase transparency and also comparability over time. In terms of balance, there's always or has been historically a clear picture that support for mitigation was greater than for adaptation in developing countries. So climate finance flows were, although they are increasing for adaptation, they're still significantly smaller than what is spent, for example, on renewable energies and mitigating emissions. In terms of instruments, Julius has referred to the different types of instruments, and grants are a key instrument, particularly for adaptation finance, where you see also less ability to kind of mobilize private finance, and mitigation finance, because there's more available, so to say, business models or cash flows attached to those activities. They are less concessional in nature, so more often loans that you have to pay back, or other types of investments. So equity, for example, that is investing directly in a project and holding shares of that, is more common in mitigation areas, because that actually more often than adaptation projects provide a revenue flow. So that is important to know. So in terms of the instruments, it's always important to look at sectors specifically and look at whether those actions that have to be taken generate revenues or not, because that informs a lot of how climate finance is spent, whether it's grant or whether it's loans, and whether those loans are concessional, so that means better terms than on the market, or whether they are market terms. That depends a bit also on the demand, so to say, how much economies and private sectors would like to do certain types of investments. And that's often kind of a factor for which type of instruments are used to provide climate finance. And yeah, here summary again on the needs compared to that, which is a different range. So yeah, this was a quick overview. Just quickly, because we don't have that much time, just going into access, because access remains a challenge for developing countries, access to climate finance sources, because of various reasons. On the left side, you can see a chart on how much money was approved, how much climate finance was approved from the multilateral climate funds, as an example, by the type of entity that implemented a project. And you see international entities, so large international institutions, organizations, a lot of UN agencies, for example, dominate that compared to regional or national institutions. And the reasons for that are that there's often limited institutional and human capacities to implement and meet the fiduciary standards or environmental and social standards, and being able to demonstrate the climate rationale of a given project. So the application procedures are quite, and project approval procedures have quite clear guidelines and expectations, and meeting them is not easy and requires a lot of institutional human capacity to actually implement. So that is a challenge to increase that, and not only for the multilateral climate funds, but also for all other types of climate finance sources. And lately, or recently, there have been an increase in direct access modalities, especially through the multilateral climate funds. So that is a system where national and regional entities register with the fund through an application procedure, and then are allowed to implement projects afterwards to up to a certain amount of climate finance. That can be less than $1 million, or that can be up to 10 million, for example. It depends on the type of institution. And all of these procedures are basically aiming to increase the uptake and the ownership of countries itself in implementing those projects, and implementing projects from climate finance sources. Further ways to increase national access and ownership to climate finance are, for example, national climate funds that kind of increase the capacity and understanding of countries, what they want to do, and kind of to build a project pipeline of climate action projects that can then be funded, as well as regional and national development banks, more climate mainstreaming, so to say, in the public authorities, in the planning and procurement processes, in a way to align and better align with the standards that are set usually for climate finance projects. So on the environmental and social side, and also including gender and inclusion policies, for example, for vulnerable communities or indigenous people, for example. So all of that is included often in the funding guidelines and policies to access climate finance, as well as general financial market development and of enabling environment, especially to attract more private sector engagement on climate action. So that means that corporations, financial institutions, but also individuals in countries are better able to access financial markets, and that would also attract more external funding, because the whole financial ecosystem and what is included in an enabling environment is also the macroeconomic stability, the legal framework where private sector actors can then better kind of participate or have are more attracted towards participating in those kind of projects. So sorry for the technical issues that I encountered throughout the meeting, but I hope this was informative. And the climate finance landscape so big. This is just a glimpse into it, but I'm glad that you're well interested in hearing about this. And yeah, I will forward the presentation to the host from Youngo. Thank you very much for giving us the chance also, Julius, to yeah, give you an overview of yeah, the needs and global climate finance flows. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you, Leonard, for this very interesting and clear presentation. We would like to invite you to fill in the attendance form for the day. Dear fellow youths, we have reached the end of the session for today. We can just do a little Q&A question if you have time. I don't know. No. So I hope that you have a good time. We would like to invite our project. Oh no. So normally we will receive our project director Zipporah for the closing remark on the first session, but she have technical issues. So Piranto will do the closing remarks. I take the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. It has been a good more than 2-hour session, which you've given time, you've been patient, and for your questions. I am so inspired by this team of young leaders across the world. And I'm sure that we are going to learn a lot from these 4 weeks. And I just pray that it's going to inspire you to come up with those actions that are going to contribute to, you know, all of our goals all over the world. So thank you so much, Julius, Natalie, Leonard, and everyone. And thank you so much, Youngo team, for coming up with this program. I really feel that it's going to contribute, it's going to be an eye-opener for all the young people who are actually representing the countries, the regions they are coming from. So I wish you all the best, and I encourage that we attend all the sessions. And like you're doing, please ask questions, because that is how we can learn all these processes, and that is going to help us to now open the doors. For example, we're talking about climate finance and how that is going to directly support the youth with their project, their ideas, their innovation. You will be able to know where you can go in your own region or country, you know, the programs that are there, the organization, when you ask questions. So thank you so much for this attendance. Kindly fill the attendance form as you've been advised. And I wish you a lovely weekend and good sessions coming ahead. God bless you.
Thank you, Piranto. And I just would
Julie.
like to, yes?
Yeah, I wanted to remind us, you know, we have a link where people can insert their pictures. If Karishma can, just re-upload the link, so you can actually put up your pictures in a customized banner that we created, and the caption to go for it as well. You can share on your social media pages, and please feel free to tag us on Yongo. Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. And I would like to highlight Zipporah, who had lead this project, even if she don't speak today. Thank you to all participants for your commitment and dedication for this academy. And just please, for taking a photo, active your camera, because it's gonna be cool to have a trace.
Julie, the photo is done. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Okay, so the session is over, and I can say that we will meet at the session in 1 week. So goodbye, have a nice weekend.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Goodbye all
weekend.
the way from Papua New Guinea.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I have a little question about the banner. Can I make it here, or maybe?
Yes, you can.
Is there only the LinkedIn and Twitter accounts? There is no Instagram account?
Yes, we do have Instagram account.
Yeah, because it was not on the email.
Yeah, our Instagram account, can someone confirm the exact name, please? Because I can't log into my Instagram right now. And my phone is broken. Yeah, so I'm logged out. Yongo's Instagram account should be Yongo's, like this.
Okay, all right.
We do have an Instagram account.
Cool. So I'll be tagging.
Thanks. Thank you.
See you soon. See you next week.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to close the meeting, if that's okay. Thanks for your participation for today. Thank you, team members. We'll catch up in the chat for the debrief and if there's anything to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Good job, Julie.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I
everyone.
was a little stressed. I don't know if it was felt, but I hope it was good.
Yes, it was.
It was great.
Thanks. And thank you, Pirato, for the end.
Thank you too.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye, guys.